So, okay, now it's 8 o'clock and exactly the time in China, and in France, in Europe is 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So firstly, I will welcome my friends and our European partner from PLG and to join this webinar. And also I want to thank you for our co-host for CPH China, and also the co-host by China Chamber for Import-Export Association, and also its National Business Affairs Department of China Pharmaceutical Association. So I want to thank you, all the organizations work together to make this webinar tonight happen. And I know COVID definitely influenced our, our travel to Europe, Europe to China, and also influence our face-to-face meeting. But this way, by webinar, still we can have a lot of opportunity to have a dialogue with each other. And tonight is a very, I think from my side, is a very heavy and also very rich content for China pharmaceutical, our guys to know how our product and can get access to European market. And I think our 6 speakers can help. We create a very richful and content for our our attendees here. So I have share my screen and to tell us what's the schedule for tonight. And so our topic today, and also our forum, we call China Pharma going global, and BD forum. And so tonight, and we have the following schedule. And here, and totally we will beginning from 8 o'clock in China time, and to 10:30 also China time. Maybe we can have a 20 minutes delayed and to have a QA, but I'll make sure all the attendees can have a good presentation to get what you have. The first one, I have my slides and for China Pharma industry now and future. The second one, we have Dr. Amanda Buzidi have a slide about the PLG and also about why Chinese biotech pharma companies should expand them beyond Europe. And the third one by our another guest, Dr. Sudat Saka for EU clinical strategy. And the fourth one, we get Mr. Chanta Java for triggering GMP inspection from European authorities for finished formulation facilities by the impact of COVID-19. And the sixth one, we would get Dr. Elna Busta for pharmaceutical pharmacovigilance requirement in EU and US. And then we got to the fifth one, for Professor Jiang Yaki. And so here we have a very important speech about reimbursement, registration, and pricing in Europe. Then we have a Dr. Amanda Buzdi for why strengthening China-Europe biotech innovation partnership. So we got the last one for a conclusion and QA. So I welcome all the attendees here. Can raise your questions. We will have listen your speech, and you can give it to a chat box, and also you can say to me personally. I can raise a question after the in the conclusion slides. So my first speech slides for my side. And I will, sorry, my friend from PLG, I will switch to Chinese, and it's in screen, and I'll make sure I can quickly finish my slide so I can, transfer my turn to Dr. Buzidi, Man Buzidi. 这样，我第一个是这个幻灯片是非常快的一个介绍。
And so I'm going to go very fast about my presentation. It's about the China farm industry and the now and the future. I have 3 contents, and the first is about 6 keywords in China farm industry, and the second is the opportunities and the trends as well as challenges, and then thirdly, it's opportunities and the trends, and then thirdly it's about challenges and the related solutions. And first of all, and the pharmaceutical industry in China is having these 6 kind of keywords, and they are hot topics in our industry. And from our perspective, ICH for this phase is a very important kind of keyword. And in 2017, and we joined ICH, and next year will be the 5th anniversary of the accession, and we're going to have a kind of comprehensive review at that time. And a lot of we have this kind of negotiations with ICH and in terms of certain kind of policies and regulations. And second, MAH, and this year marks the 5th anniversary of the enactment of MAH. So it is very important for our coordinated development. And thirdly, QCE, or quality consistency in evaluation. And we started this one in 2015. It was a great promotion to China's pharmaceutical industry. It's also a very disruptive in a policy for China's market. And then VBP, the volume-based, the volume bidding kind of procurement, and this is also another very kind of hot topic. And how can we achieve high efficiency, and how can we secure the competitiveness of the products into China's market? And we call it this kind of national negotiations. Every day we are having this kind of negotiations, and which is highly relevant to the life of normal peoples, but it's also will have some kind of promotion to our procedures or processing. And then I just put 2 more kind of keywords here. One is innovation. When you're talking about innovation, this is the inevitable kind of topics for all the stakeholders or players in this market. If you want to enjoy a certain kind of market share, and the innovation is a must. And then finally, internationalization. And that's why we are arranging these kind of topics to talk about globalization or internationalization. So after we joined ISH, for all the documents, and we had to abide by the standards and the policies from the international stages. And then next, I'd like to talk about opportunities and trends. I think we have 3 opportunities. And the first is the regulatory kind of synergy. This is a huge opportunity for China. Again, ICH. And the PICS. And we are also put the accession into PICS on the agenda from the NMPA. And then is the huge potential of the China's market in terms of pharmaceutical. And we are the second single largest farm market, only second to the US market. And in China in early times, and we only focus on the domestic market, and now we are discussing about how can we move to or zoom out to the big scope into the global market. And certainly is the farm supply chain, and it is a lot of opportunities for those chronic diseases. And certainly farms supply chain from API to intermediates, and we have a very full-fledged supply chain in China. And we have a lot of giants and have developed their businesses and their plans or strategies in China. I think this also represents very good opportunities for China's players. And these are the 3 trends. And first is chemistry, from chemistry to medicine. This kind of the shift of the mindset. And in earlier times, and we focus on a lot of on intermediates and API. Now we need to learn to shift the lens from those smaller domain to a larger one. That is the medicine, the complete medicine scope. And in that case, we need to shift our mindset. And then second, we need to shift from small molecules to large molecules. And biotech is a hot kind of topic in China, and those small molecules and players have not been prepared to understand large molecules. And I think that we need to learn to understand molecules and etc. and what is the kind of producing or manufacturing environment for that. And that's why we are enjoying a good kind of a rapid growth or development in the field of biotech. And next is the third one is China market only. I just mentioned we have about 4,400 players. And in early times, they don't have a sense of globalization or internationalization. How can we start from the perspective of the global supply chain or the global kind of R&D? And this is also an opportunity or a challenge for the players in China. And then next, I'd like to talk about challenges and the solutions. And then first, again, ICH. It raised a lot of challenges to us. And we only have local standards in earlier times. And we just rely on those local standards. And after we access or after we join ICH, we need to zoom out our perspective, on the global standards, from R&D to manufacturing and operation. How can we shift our perspective, to a global one? And the second, cost and efficiency. We know that in China, the VBP and the reimbursement have put forward a lot of the requirements and demand on cost and efficiency. And then how can we join the global competition in a better way? Thirdly, innovation. When you're talking about innovation, in China, we lack the original sources of innovation, for innovation. And this is a weak linkage of China's pharmaceutical industry. Then we also have, less experiences on executing those innovation from the beginning to the end. For example, the clinical, how to carry out clinical trials and how to write those medical writings and CMC. And in CMC, we also have a lot of challenges. And then solutions, I'd like to give you 3 points. And the first, whether we can achieve one product for 2 markets. That is mean the same product can go into or enter 2 different markets, the Chinese market and the overseas markets. A lot of players in China, they are rediscussing globalization or internationalization. This is the true internationalization from my perspective. With the guidance of ICH, how can we globalize or how can we internationalize ICH and etc. And so for all the participants and audience, we have almost 300 representatives from 300 enterprises. And how can we deploy internationalization? How can we serve the global market better? This will be something that we cannot escape from in the coming future. And the second is about the consolidation of the global supply chain. How can we strengthen the global supply chain? And from this one, we can also find a lot of opportunities. And this is not only a local one, it is the global one.
And those who are in the supply chain should have a global thinking. And also, in digitalization in every aspect, you must have everything in place. And that is also the reason why that we should strategize ourselves. And how about innovation? Well, we have our indigenous innovation already, and I believe that the global BD partnership will also happen. And license in, license out will also be the future, will be the thing we will do for a short time, but it will not be the only thing, right? Licensing and license out. Licensing and licensing out are not just the only means. And joint venture, JV, on the common overseas investment are all part of the landscape for future BD partnership. So we will definitely provide very valuable solutions. This is the whole point that we are holding this conference in the first place. And also, we need to cooperate for future. So Engine worked with PLG, CCM, HPIE, CPEA, and also worked with Sino Expo in Pharma market. So we worked with each and every of them so that we can build up a platform to globalize and to communicate with the world. And also, there will be another conference in December, on December 17th this year, which is called CPGI Shanghai. So Engine, it will be your global PD partner in the life science, and especially we can explore more future and the cooperation.
Yeah, I was for very more. So now I welcome Dr. Amanda Buzidi to give a presentation about the PLG and for his opinion for the third topic. So welcome, Dr. Amanda Buzidi. I turn off, please. Welcome.
Thank you, Leo. Thank you, Leo. I would first like to thank you, Leo, for organizing the webinar as well as the sponsors of the webinar. So good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar. And I know it's pretty late in China, so we'll try not to be too boring during this session. So I'm Dr. Ahmed Bouzidi. I'm the Vice President of Product Life Group, and I'm really very happy to be there. So a few words about Product Life Group. Maybe next slide. Thank you. So Product Life Group is a regulatory compliance and corporate strategic firm assisting big pharma, biotech, generics, and biosimilar companies, as well as medtech companies throughout the entire life cycle of medicines and medtech products, which means from preclinical to market access and post-marketing stages. So PLG has consolidated its global footprint through strategic acquisition in North America, in Central Europe and Asia, and we even plan to consolidate our presence in China next year. So PLG at a glance, as you can see, we work with big pharmaceutical companies. 7 out of 10 big pharma companies are our customers, but we like working with mid-size and SMEs. We have over 300 customers, mid-size SMEs and startups. We have 900 experts, 700 internally and 200 through strategic partnerships. We are covering over 130 countries, so it's really a global footprint, and the global footprint of the company is growing up every year. We have 600 ongoing projects and over 20,000 since PLG incorporation. Next slide. Next slide. Yes, thank you. So we have physically 40 offices in countries covering Europe, the US, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Tunisia, and so on. So as you can see, we are covering a large part of the globe. We work from defining corporate strategies for companies. market access, marketing, commercial, regulatory affairs, regulatory operations, PV, medical information, medical writing, CMC, biopharma and medical device, as I said previously. So here on the map, you can see which country we are covering. It's pretty broad. I forgot to mention South America also. Next slide. Thank you. So I will try to cover briefly why Chinese biotech and pharma companies should expand their business in Europe. I think it's essential, and I will try to show you why. Next slide. Before to start, I will tell you a few words about myself. So I'm working in the biotech field for 32 years now. I have a PhD in cellular biology and an MBA. I started my career in the biotech department of a French pharmaceutical company called LFB. And from 1999, I created with colleagues from Pasteur Institute and CNRS, two main research institutes in Europe, a first company called Dosage Therapeutics, which was specialized in immunovirology. We sold the company after 3.5 years to a big pharma. Afterward, from 2003 to 2009, I went to China, advising notably the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Research, provinces, and public and private institutions, large private and public institutions. In 2009, I went back to Europe, in Switzerland, where I'm living today, to create Vaccine Holding, a company specialized in immuno-oncology. And we have partnerships with Chinese companies, in fact, at that time, because it was using a combination of therapeutic vaccines with immune checkpoint inhibitors. And we had various collaboration with Chinese companies at that time. And I brought the company to pre-IPO stage. So another successful companies had the chance to create and to manage. At the same time, I held several European positions. I'm notably even today senior associate of the Royal Society of Medicines in London. Until recently, I was president and board member of the European Biopharmaceutical Enterprises, which was the largest European federation federating biotech companies from SMEs to the largest one, Amgen, Roche, and so on. I also was member of FPR, the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industry and Association, and board member and a member of the Scientific Advisory Board of Vaccines Europe. So you can see on the right a panel of companies I worked with, and with these companies I'm still in close contact. So it can be helpful, you know, in order to establish some business in Europe. Next slide. Yes. So a few words about the European pharmaceutical market. You know, it has been valued over 200 billion, positioning Europe as the second biggest pharmaceutical market in the world. Obviously, if we consider Europe as an entity, if not, it's clear that China is the second largest European pharmaceutical market with 137 billion euros annually. But Europe accounts for 22% of the world pharmaceutical sales in 2020, and 18% of sales of new drugs were on the European market. And the total volume of medicinal products consumed globally is set to grow about 4% annually through 2025. So it's a growing market, it's a dynamic market, and the trend is extremely good. In 2020, the European pharmaceutical industry invested about 37 billion in R&D. So it's less than China, which is 60. It's far less than the US, which is over 100 billion. But it's obviously significant. And the European market maintains and forecasts an extensive growth patterns. So for Chinese company, is the best time to explore opportunities and businesses in the European market. Next slide. Yes. On another hand, we have to talk about China, obviously. Chinese biopharmaceutical companies offer a major opportunity for both multinational companies and European companies. Thanks to a decade of sustained government support, China is now competing aggressively with MNCs for domestic market shares in the innovative drug sector. It's a dramatic change which occurred in the past 15 years. And I saw it because I was in situ at that time, and I saw the dramatic changes. Over the next 5 to 10 years, Chinese companies will continue to improve their innovation capabilities and will compete directly with MNCs overseas. And we have some scouts like Beijing, Hengrui, Wuxi AppTec, or Juxi Bioscience, who are examples of these dramatic changes. And this trend represents a huge opportunity for both EU and Chinese biopharmaceutical companies to maximize EU market access for innovative drugs at affordable price. And I will explain why later on. Next slide. Yes. So Europe has a robust regulatory environment for drug approval. In order to support both fast access to new treatment options and to stimulate drug development in areas of unmet needs, the EMA introduced accelerated access scheme with lower regulatory requirement. The famous one is the PRIME scheme, but obviously you have conditional market approval, post-marketing surveillance. And this means that certain drugs or new indication, and I know that China is working a lot on new indications, can obtain faster marketing authorization in Europe based on relatively small clinical trials with short observation period. You can obtain a conditional market approval after phase 2 using a single arm trial. So this is a dramatic change, and the PRIME scheme allow that now. Obviously, cancer drugs are at center stage of these new incentives in Europe, but also other chronic diseases. Next slide. But we cannot forget what is also happening. You know, in 2017, we have a big number of patents which expire, and patent expiry of leading branded product is paving the entry of generics and biosimilars. So we are not only talking about branded products, but also generics and biosimilars are needed, are requested in Europe. So the pharmaceutical drug market is expected to witness significant growth in the near future due to patent expiry of major pharmaceutical products. We know that another block of product will patent expire in 2023, which means that this trend will grow up in the coming years. A large number of companies are today introducing generics and biosimilar products into the global market, so contributing to the high volume of sales. Chinese and Indian companies being the first range of them. Therefore, this has created lucrative opportunities for market players in supplying low-cost generics and biosimilars. But we have to notice that among all drug types, the branded segment will continue to dominate the European pharmaceutical drug market. And among type, as I said previously, the oncology segment is still expecting to hold the dominant position in Europe through 2025. The oncology segment in specialty drug represent over 40% of the market, you know, so it's dramatically on the top of the specialty segment. Next slide. Yes. But European has clearly a lot of needs. And I would say that the COVID-19 outbreak has amplified that, has shown that and highlighted that. New expensive drugs increase pharmaceutical expenditure and put a financial burden on EU healthcare system, clearly. For more than 50% of people in the EU, the cost of drugs represent a heavy financial burden, despite the insurance coverage. EU member states increasingly face uncertainties over the real-life effectiveness and related overall cost of new medicines. You know, we talk a lot today about health technology. As the previous slide, yes, yes, thank you. We talk a lot about health technology assessment, reimbursement, if the product show real clinical outcomes, and again, this will become certainly a trend in the coming years. Moreover, competition, which should in principle drive down prices, is becoming less straightforward over the time, as new types of products represent a growing share of budgets. We talked about novel oncology therapies. It can be the immune checkpoint inhibitors, but we clearly here are talking about ATMPs, CAR-T, KNK, and so on. You all know it's autologous treatments, which are extremely expensive, difficult to implement, and unfortunately, it represents today a burden for the society. And the EU pharmaceutical strategy therefore proposes action at the EU level to promote the affordability of drugs and the sustainability of the EU healthcare system in order for EU patients to get access to cost-effective drugs in a timely, equitable, and affordable way. Again, considering the growing cost burden of innovative medicine, China innovative companies could play a real pivotal role in providing these medicines at more affordable costs. I don't say cheap, I say affordable. Next. Yes, and you have also a problem of shortages, you know, because we talked about affordability in the previous slide. Now we will talk about drug shortages, which is increasing and is posing threats to patient safety and impact patient outcome and patient care continuum. In recent years, the prevalence of medicine shortages reported in the most EU countries has increased exponentially. For example, in France, there were 1,400 medicine shortages in 2019 compared to 870 in 2018, and only 44 in 2008. So you see how this is today a real issue for the European healthcare system. And a recent survey of European Association of Hospital Pharmacists pointed the rising shortages of oncology medicines, with 47 of respondents stating that oncology products are among the medicines more commonly in shortage, compared to 39% in 2018. So there is here a real opportunity for Chinese company to make large business in Europe, because the need is real. The EU pharmaceutical strategy is calling for enhanced coordination at the world level, not at the European level, but at the world level. And China could be a real significant player here. And the development of tools to prevent, manage, and address drug shortages. Here again, China innovative companies could play a major role in avoiding not only oncology drug shortages, but also a lot of disease areas. Next slide. Structural changes create new Chinese companies. It's true, because while there is a certain conservatism in Europe, in China it's the total opposite, and that's why now we are at a crossroads, you know, in terms of potential partnership. The number of new Chinese biopharma companies has risen steadily over the past 3 decades, accelerating dramatically in the last 10 years. While company formation declined in other major markets such as the US, Europe, Japan, more than 140 new biotech companies emerged in China from 2010 to 2020, and even more. Funding is also a key asset for China. More and more private capital is available to the industry, so through ventures and private equity funds, which underwrite most R&D in China. Please note that such funding strategy helped the US pass the EU 30 years ago. So clearly that's the strategy which has to be implemented, and China understood that very well. Government and institutional funding through China National Science Foundation and government grants are also channeled through private equity fund and are an important source of funding. It's true that it's really the coordination between public, the government, the state, and private equity VCs as allow biopharma companies in China to grow up dramatically. Today, China has the second highest funding globally. Also, the US still leads by a significant margin, 212 billion versus 60 billion in China. But as I mentioned previously, 37 billion only in Europe. So it's China has today a real power, you know, to develop innovative product. And I know that this trend is also ramping up dramatically. Next slide. So after a decade of sustained government support, including policy reform, talent development, and funding, China-based biopharmaceutical companies are now able to launch innovative drugs for the treatment of cancer and chronic diseases worldwide. It's really a new paradigm, a new shift in the international biopharma business. The EU system is based on the principle that innovative drugs have to be rewarded in order to support fast access to new treatment and to stimulate drug development in areas of unmet needs, We talked about oncology, but infectious diseases, COVID-19 is a good example, and other emerging diseases. But affordability, cost burden, and availability shortages of novel drugs remains a priority for Europe. Thus, Chinese innovative biopharmaceutical company could play a major role in providing novel drugs where unmet medical needs still exist. For European companies, it's a unique opportunity to acquire innovative products and to build long-term strategic partnership with Chinese companies. For Chinese companies, also a unique opportunity to access to the second or third pharmaceutical market in the world, and thus ensuring sustainable incomes. It's true that more prosically, it's true that Chinese biotech companies are indeed mainly focusing on cancer treatment. This has created an hyper-competitive market in which some are doomed to fail. So China-Europe strategic licensing acquisition deals represent a real opportunity for both parties and above all for patients who will be able to access to new medicines at affordable prices. And I think that in that way, in order to maximize your success rate in Europe, PLG could really assist you to overcome the EU regulatory hurdles which could be faced by Chinese companies. But my colleagues will explain you later on how we could proceed and how the expertise of PLG is. So I will stop there. I give you back the floor, my friend Leo.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Manapazidi, for your introduction for why Chinese biotech company should go to European market. And I know you get a hall and you aid this presentation. I welcome you again. Give the hall, we can go there. So later, thank you again for Dr. Manapazidi. So the third speaker also from PLG, Dr. Suga Saka. And Dr. Suga Saka will have the main content about clinical development and pathway to Europe. So Dr. Suga Saka, can you give a quick introduction by yourself, then go to your presentation? So welcome you, have an introduction by yourself. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Leo. So good evening there and good afternoon to my colleagues in Europe. I am Dr. Suga Sarkar. I have basically I'm a medical doctor with specialization in pharmacology and respiratory medicine. Before joining the pharmaceutical company, I was practicing in the critical care division of various hospitals in India as well as in the US. And my pharmaceutical company career starts as associate director in clinical development in companies such as Novartis, Cipla, and Glenmark. At present, I am working in PLG as the general manager in the preclinical and clinical strategy. So the agenda of today's webinar is to cover the important topics. That is the non-clinical and the clinical strategy. And basically this webinar is designed to understand the complexity of the EU regulatory authorities, the guidelines and the requirement. The clinical development is always incurring a huge cost to the country, and that is the reason we need to draw a balance between the cost and meeting of the regulatory requirement. We need an optimizing clinical and non-clinical strategy for the right start. Otherwise, use of the investment go in vain. And the most important thing is we have to map an optimal pathway for the product's preclinical and clinical development, and the registration of this product is depending upon the success of the preclinical and clinical results. So in the next slide, I will show you the next slide, please. So in the next slide, I will show you today's agenda. The agenda of today's webinar is to cover important topics such as non-clinical and clinical strategy, scientific advice meeting, clinical study management, and consolidation and presentation of non-clinical and clinical data. We choose these 4 topics for this webinar as they are very crucial in the development of any product. Also, this webinar topic will be more focused on the requirement of EU And we will also like to compare this with the other regulatory agency for better understanding. So first, we will start with the topic that is non-clinical and clinical strategy. For a new chemical entities or complex generics, a pharma company generates robust preclinical and clinical data based on their understanding of the product and the local guidelines. However, if they intend to target markets such as Europe or US, then the study requirement might change. And this change is due to difference in the guidelines in terms of number and design of the studies. Even for many new generic products, the strategy can be challenging. And this challenging is due to lack of product-specific guidelines in regions such like Europe. Hence, a non-clinical and clinical strategy plays a very important role in drug development and the involvement of external expertise to conduct a gap analysis of the already available data and designing a robust development plan can result in successful and timely marketing of the authorization. Now, in this diagram, you can see the drug development process. Now, why is the right preclinical or clinical strategy so crucial in the drug development process? I will try to explain this briefly. The development of a new drug is complex and is a costly process. The research and development involves the discovery of the new product, and that includes the generation of the robust non-clinical data and the development phase that includes generation of the clinical data. It is worth noting that nearly 10,000 NCs are investigated to potentially treat disease, but only 250 make it to the animal testing, and 5 to 10 will qualify for testing in humans. The conduct of the clinical studies involves more time and cost than the preclinical studies. So it has a significant impact on the cost and the timeline for the product development. Hence, a clinical strategy is one of the most important steps in the drug development process. If I talk about generic medicine, the generic medicine application do not need the preclinical and clinical studies as it is required for the innovator or originator medicines, but they need a bridging study such as bioequivalence study or a biowaiver to waive the BE study. And that is the reason a clinical strategy involving a plan of bioequivalence study or a biowaiver makes an important role in the drug development of generics. Now let us look at the next slide. Now this slide explains the United States and why the United States has one country and one regulatory agency pattern. Now if I go into the background of US, the US has 50 different states, but it has only one regulatory agency, as you know, that is USFDA, which approves the marketing authorization for all the 50 states. Thus, it can be considered as one country with one regulatory agency. The plus point of US is that the Office of the Generic Drug publishes the product specific guidance, and this product specific guidance is updated frequently for most of the products. So the clinical strategy of generic product in US is comparatively very clear. And if I compare with Europe, in Europe, the product specific guidelines are very less. And that is the reason many of our clients understand the US requirement very well, possibly because of the product specific guidelines. And they face difficulty in managing the Europe. So I will explain how the Europe regulation is different from the US. Now in this slide, you can see Europe has 28 different countries. Of course, now it is 27 because of Brexit. And all of you know the generic medicine in Europe are approved by 4 different marketing authorization procedures, namely the centralized procedure, the mutual recognition procedure, the national procedure, and the decentralized procedure. Though all the EU regulatories or all the EU countries follow almost the same set of guidelines, which is published by EMEA, and the assessors are, but the agencies and the assessors involved are different in each of these 27 countries. And this makes the regulatory procedure more demanding as the assessment strategy and the expectation of different agencies increase the complexity of overall authorization procedure. Interaction with the appropriate regulatory agency might help in getting the proper direction for the development of the complex product. For example, the scientific advice meeting. However, it can be challenging to understand that the EU regulation and also establish the communication between the different EU agencies to manage the complex activities such as the scientific advice meeting, the clinical trial application, and the dossier submission and assessment. Moreover, as I said, there is limited product-specific bioequivalence guidance for the generics, which makes the decision for the clinical study and conduct slightly difficult. So, in the next slide, I will try to discuss a few ways to tackle this situation. Now, for a new chemical entities or complex generics, even for the standard generics, I have told you that a complex strategy need to be enrolled, and there is an involvement of external expertise to conduct the gap. So what we do is we conduct a gap analysis and a due diligence of already available data and design a robust development plan. Now let us see how it works. We have worked on several due diligence and strategy projects for a client. A client submits the non-clinical and clinical data to us through a secure platform. Depending upon their expectation and areas they need, our experts typically conduct a due diligence of the available data to identify the gap and suggest the required studies to bridge the gap for the targeted regulatory submission in a robust development plan, which also includes appropriate registration route for the proposed product. Now, in the next 3 slides, what we will do, we will present you the examples of some of the complex scenarios and focus on the generic product and what is the difference in the non-clinical clinical study requirement in the US and Europe, and why the designing the strategy in Europe may be more challenging. So in this slide, you can see, I will briefly talk about the orally inhaled products and the related challenges for handling them in Europe. Now, orally inhaled products are complex products because it's a combination of drug and device. Now, you might be aware that US FDA regulation for oral inhaled products recommends wait for evidence approach. The plus point of US FDA is US FDA provides a separate guidelines for each orally inhaled product. Now, if I compare with Europe, in Europe there is no specific product guidelines for such product, but there is a EU generalized guidelines, and these generalized guidelines suggest a stepwise approach to establish the therapeutic equivalence. Now, understanding this complex guidelines and implementing the same is challenging. Hence, it is very crucial to involve the right expertise with the experience in handling the clinical development of complex respiratory product. I will like to add here that the conduction of the respiratory B studies, or I can say the PK studies, may be very complex because of high variability in the PK that occurs because of various reasons related to the study designs. Hence, a clinical expert having a strong experience of managing such studies is required, and it can ensure the efficient clinical design, which will reduce the chances of the variability leading to the promising result. Now let's move to the next slide. The next slide, I have given an example of the generic product and highlight the similarities and differences between the guidelines published by various regulatory agencies in dealing with a highly variable product. Now, as you know, all the major regulatory recommend a crossover or a parallel design, non-compartmental analysis to determine the PK parameters, and ANOVA is performed at the 5% level of significance. However, there is differences in the criteria of widening of the CI, that is 90% confidence interval limit in various regulatory agencies, and there is also a different way of calculating it. For example, widening of the confidence interval is applied to only Cmax in EU and Brazil, whereas This widening is applicable for both the CMAX and AUC for the US. Now let's see the third example related to biowaiver in the next slide. Now biowaiver is one of the most discussed topic in the generic drug development. Biowaiver simply means waiving of a clinical study, or I will say bioequivalence study, by providing supporting evidence in the biowaiver document for not conducting a bioequivalence study. Now biowaiver can be considered in different scenarios. The first, biowaiver of the lowest strength based on the data generated at the highest strength. Second, the biowaiver based on providing the evidence of well established safety and efficacy data of a drug. And this requirement is only more specific to the Europe. The third scenario is the most interesting one, that is the biowaiver for the BCS group of drug. And the example in this slide is more specific to the BCS based biowaiver. Now, to define in the simple words, the BCS, that is Biopharmaceutical Classification System, is a regulatory mechanism through which a drug developer and a generic companies can obtain a biowaiver of a clinical bioequivalence studies. Now, in Europe as well as US, we know that the BCS based biowaiver is applied to both the class 1 and the class 3 as per the guidelines. However, there are some difference in between the US and the Europe. In Europe, the in vitro permeability studies are usually not mandatory and the biowaiver is based on the published literature. However, for US submission, the in vitro permeability study are mandatory and any published literature is considered as a supportive document only. I will sum up the discussion of the first topic by reiterating that the non-clinical and clinical strategy plays an important role in development of a new drug and a generic medicine. The previous few examples give a glimpse of all the possible challenges that can be faced in designing the clinical strategy. However, there are many more examples like strategy of a complex generics. For example, the liposomal or nano formulations, choosing an appropriate bridging studies to link the clinical data with gaps. Thus, involving experienced subject matter expert at the right stage of the development is very crucial. Now, I will like to move to the next topic on the scientific advice meeting, and I'll cover a few slides on that. Now, scientific advice meeting. For a new chemical entities or for a complex generics, even a robust development plan might sometimes have gap due to the complexity of the product or the regulatory environment. Hence, getting an advice from the regulatory agency in form of scientific advice meeting would add a high value to the future development, including the clinical study conduct, as well as the assessment procedure to obtain the marketing authorization. Now, in this slide, I have tried to explain the steps involved in the scientific advice meeting, which is more focused with EU agency. Giving the background, a scientific advice meeting helps you to create a variable regulatory strategy and also ensures that the drug development is on the correct pathway to receive the marketing approval. Typically, this meeting involves or lasts for 1 to 2 hours, depending upon the complexity of the project. So it is most important to run smoothly so that it meets the objectives of the meeting. Now, what are the steps of this scientific advice meeting? I have mentioned these steps in the slide. The first important step is conduct the due diligence. The conduction of the due diligence of available data by identifying the gap and suggest studies to bridge the gap. This helps in preparing the robust clinical strategy, and this is included in the briefing document of the scientific advice meeting. The second most important step is choosing an important EU agency or appropriate EU agency. Now, this depends upon factors such as planned clinical trials, site location, expertise of the agency in assessing the specific product, the targeted country as the RMS for the planned marketing authorization. The third step is draft list of questionnaire rationale and background of these questions. Next step, establish a contact with the chosen agency and payment of the applicable fees. Then start the draft briefing document and the meeting preparation for the scientific advice meeting. We present the non-clinical and clinical strategy and the development plan to the regulatory in the face-to-face or telephonic scientific advice meeting. Draft minutes of the meeting, post SM and release it to agency and finalize the MOM. Update and finalization of the clinical development plan based on the final MOM received from the agency. Now we have managed several scientific in the past on complex product, and based off our experience, I would like to highlight that there are a few important steps involved in execution of an effective scientific advice meeting. The first important step is planning the meeting. Now this planning of the meeting is to ensure the release of robust briefing package to the agency, confirmation of the meeting date and time, regular calls between the client and our experts to discuss the objective and flow of the meeting. The second step, we do a meeting rehearsal. Now this rehearsal includes conduction of the mock presentation, preparing a response for the possible questions expected by the agency, finalizing role and responsibilities between our expert and the client for the scientific advice meeting. And next comes the conduct of the actual meeting. The most important in conduct of the actual meeting is the time management. So the time management of SM is very crucial. Our non-clinical and clinical expert will be leading the meeting, ensure the discussion of all the questions with sufficient response from the agencies, and summarize the meeting points before the closing of the meeting. Then we do briefing of the meetings done after. It is mainly done after the meeting is over between the experts and our client, and integration. That is integrating the response of the agency and drafting the MOM. Now in this slide, you can see a case study. Now this case study is for a case study relating to a new biological entity. Our client who intend to register their product in the EU approached us to understand the potential of the product in EU and the best possible clinical development plan. The proposed biologics was already authorized in few non-EU countries for multiple indications, but was not approved in EU for any of the indications. The client has conducted preclinical PK studies and the PD studies and few clinical studies for the target indications in addition to the CMC data. As both the product and the target indications were very complex, a thorough due diligence of the client's data and confirmation of the development pathway in the sum was with an appropriate agency was needed. We provided the client with detailed proposal with the timelines for the complete development plan of the product, starting from the due diligence and the strategy. Next, the scientific advice briefing, actual conduct of the preclinical and clinical studies, dossier development for marketing authorization. The proposal proved to be useful for the client's internal management meeting also and budget approval. Now in the next slide, I will have further explain the role what we played in SM. Now, we conduct the due diligence of the client preclinical and clinical data not conducted in Europe and design a plan for the gap analysis. Now the key step in this whole project was execution of the SAM due to the challenges. The challenges was lack of clarity in the clinical trial guidelines. The historical success of other product in the target indication was very less, and very few EU agencies had experience of providing advice on any similar product and indication. So the choice of agency of SM was also difficult. We collected all the possible preclinical and clinical intelligence via the network makes agency assessor suggest the best possible indication and relevant endpoints for the planned study. We choose an appropriate agency for SA, drafted the required document, presented in the SM, and executed the successful SM. In the SM, the client received required clarity on the development plan and was satisfied with the meeting outcome. Now, in the next slide, we will go Next slide, please. Next. Next. Yeah. So we will begin with the topic of the clinical study management. Now, why this clinical study management is important? Now, once a sponsor receives clarity on the strategy from EU or any agency to go ahead in the clinical phase, the next major challenge they face is the managing the PE study or the clinical trials. The complex regulatory environment and required local expertise can be a barrier in the conduction of the studies in EU or non-EU regions, countries such as India. Hence, an involvement of a partner to manage the oversight of the studies on behalf of sponsors is very valuable. Now, why this BA studies is very important, or what are the important activities in this conduction of the BA studies? The first important step, identification and selection of appropriate location or the CRO for the planned studies. Now, based on the recommendation received from the regulatory agency, choosing the right location for the conduct of the BA studies or clinical studies can be a significant decision as it impacts the overall budget and the timelines of the project. Understanding the study requirement as well as the agency expectation is very important to choose the location of the study conduct. For example, the BA study conducted in India is accepted by the EU agencies if it is conducted in compliance with the EU regulatory guidelines. However, the agency might expect EU population in the clinical trials, which is involving the patients. Here, the understanding of the agency's expectation with support of an external expert can be useful. The second step, review of the study document drafted by CROs. Now, various documents are involved in the clinical studies, such as the project contracts, the protocol, consent form, case report form, insurance document, ethics committee, and clinical trial application, the statistical analysis plan, the clinical study report. These documents can be drafted by the CRO, but in many cases, the CRO team and the sponsor do not possess the in-house strategy or expertise to review the document. The third is the on-site visit for the site selection and monitoring activities. As per ICS GCP, it is very important and it is the responsibility for the sponsor.
So, excuse me, Dr. Saka, because the time, limited. So, yeah, I ask you maybe give a quick conclusion and of these slides. Is it okay for you?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so it is very important to have the on-site visit for the site selection and monitoring and audit activities. Now, the last slides. The next topic which is covered is medical writing, and I will say that there are different type of applications for Europe. That is the full application 8.3, generic application 10.1, hybrid application 10.3, similar biological application 10.4, well-established use 10A, and FDC, that is fixed dose combination, that is 10B. Now let us understand the different legal basis to generate the data required for this one. So I will move to the next slide. Next slide. This is the snapshot for CTD document, and this CTD format is more or less same for all the ICS documents or ICS countries. Previous slide, please. Previous slide. Previous. Yeah. So in EU, there is a possibility of submitting a module based on legal basis 10A, based on the published literature, whereas this provision is not available in US. So the literature search report to support the legal basis of 10A, we provide the technical gap analysis of the module, and the most important, nowadays the EU regulatory has been very strict for the ERA. So we also help the client in preparing the ERA, that is environmental risk report, for their various products. Next slide, please. So in total, we help the client in preparing the clinical strategy, in help them in the clinical study management and the CTD preparation. I will like to go into the couple of questions which we received before the meeting and like to answer these questions in this one. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the question number one, which is the question for many of the viewers. when an applicant would like to file a generic application using an approved ANDA, they need to purchase RLD that is marketed in Europe to reperform the BE study again. If the RLD is actually the same brand of medicinal product from an MNC, would the BE study that is performed outside EU using the samples will be accepted by the agency? Now, my answer is applicants should perform the BE study again, because the EU requirement is the RLD should be available and marketed in Europe. In other words, the BE study done for ANDA cannot, that is ANDA for US, cannot be used for the EU if the RLD is not from EU. I will go to the next question, which is also the most important one. Now, regarding the finished product of known substance, we finalize the clinical study protocol via scientific advice meeting. Or basically, we can ask the clinical CRO to help us the design. We want a problem after that. Yes, if the product is simple product, and if there is a clear guidelines and product specific guidelines and the CRO has past experience, then SME is not required. However, if the product is complex, there is no clear guidelines, or I will like to say that if there is ambiguity in the clinical design or in the similar approval approved product in EU, we will like to suggest that we should get a clarity from the regulatory agency before starting the clinical study. Next question, please. Next slide. Yeah. So this was in short about the clinical strategy, and thank you for the patient listening. Have a nice day.
So thank you, Dr. Sugat Saka. You know, clinical study is very, very important topic, you know, for all the pharmaceutical projects. And I think 20 minutes, definitely we cannot cover all the things there. So I hope in next, maybe the few months, we can have a dedicated, you know, panel and a webinar for clinical study. So thank you again for your very detailed report in the clinical study. Thank you. So I will later we welcome you to for the panel in case the question raised for the clinical study. So again, thank you, Dr. Sugat Saka. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome, Mr. Cheta Java, and so his topic we cover about GMP inspection, and we know in the current lot inspection by EU authority already pending or delayed. So I think this is also very a concern for a lot of Chinese pharmaceutical companies. So Cheta, I'll ask you, you give a quick introduction by yourself, then go to your stage for this topic. So welcome now.
Yes, thank you very much, Leo, for handing over the floor. I hope I'm loud and audible to everyone. To start with, I'll give you a quick introduction about myself. So I'm Chetan Javia. I'm one of the senior regulatory and CMC expert at Product Life Group, and I'm based in Prague in Czech Republic. By qualification, I'm a pharmacist, and I did my post-graduation in international business. And I have 21 years of experience working both within the pharmaceutical industry as well as in consulting. So next slide, please. So these are the topics that we are going to cover in today's webinar. So we'd like to share our experience working with more than 50 pharmaceutical companies based out of China and helping them in getting the European GMP certification. And we will also see how COVID-19 has impacted the overall GMP certification program. Next slide, please. So before we go into further details, I think it's important to first understand what is European Union, because there are different terminologies which are being used and it's often quite confusing. So most of the clients from China are quite familiar with the US requirement because it's just one country, one national authority, and there's one standard process. But that is not the case with the European Union. Can you please click on the next, please, so that we can see the diagrams? Thank you. So as you can see, there are 28 European member states, which is now 27 after Brexit. Now, and then we have 4 European Free Trade Association states, which is Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland. So the 27 European member states and the 3 EFTA states, it's what constitute the European Economic Area. Switzerland is still an independent country, and it has its own national health authority, which is the Swissmedic, which is responsible for performing the GMP audit, as well as reviewing the marketing authorization application. So going forward, when we mention EU in the presentation, it has to be understood as the European Economic Area, which is the 27 European countries and the 3 EFTA states. Next slide, please. So in today's webinar, we will be restricting our discussions with respect to the triggering of the GMP inspection for the finished product manufacturing sites only. In the interest of time, we will also plan a separate webinar for triggering the EU GMP inspection for APIs, excipients, and packaging materials. So in EU, these are the 3 rules which basically governs the European GMP requirements. So you can find all the regulations within the Hydraulics Volume 4, the Commission Directive 2003/94 EC, and Regulations 1252 of 2014. Next slide, please. So the first and the foremost question is we have to understand who is responsible for performing the audit and what are the other agencies that are involved in the European GMP certification process. So there are many agencies, but in order to simplify, we have classified them into 2 broad categories. The first one is the European Medicines Agency, which is a central body across Europe. And they are responsible for, in a more strategic role, meaning they are responsible for preparing the guidelines or reviewing the existing guidelines, and also coordinating among the European member states for the conduct of the European GMP inspection. As such, the EMA is not responsible for performing the audits by themselves. And that brings us to these other sets of organizations, which we call as the national competent authorities. So each and every European member states, they have their own national health authority. Just to give you a few examples, in France, we have ANSM, and in Czech Republic, we have SUKL. Same is the case in Germany, like BfArM, and so on. So these are the authorities which are basically responsible for performing the GMP audit and issuing the EU GMP certifications, both within the European Union as well as outside the European Union in the 3rd countries as well. Next slide, please. And what's important to also understand what triggers the European GMP inspection process. So there are basically 4 triggers. The first one is the for-cause inspection. So this kind of the audits are triggered whenever there is any quality issue or there is a product complaint, or whenever there are circumstances which endangers the public health within the European Union. So because of those quality issues, the European agency will immediately trigger a GMP inspection. The second important triggers is when you submit either a new marketing authorization or a variation to an existing MA to add a new manufacturing site. So this will by default trigger a European GMP inspection, and this process will run in parallel with the marketing authorization application. And the last one is the voluntary inspection, which means that you don't have any quality issues and you don't intend to file any application. So we are just requesting the European agencies to come and audit the facility for without any specific reasons. So considering the priorities, if you want to trigger the European GMP inspection for your manufacturing facility, the best way would be to file a new marketing authorization application, or add or file a variation to add your manufacturing site to one of the existing MAs. It is still possible to request for a voluntary inspection, but this type of requests are not considered as the priority for the European authorities, and you will be looking for a long waiting time in order to receive an audit. Next slide, please. So going a little bit more into the operational aspects of asking the basic question, whom, who, what, when. Let's first understand who is responsible for submitting an application to the European authorities. So it can be submitted either by the applicant or the marketing authorization holder or the European importer. So these are the responsible people who has to prepare an application and submit to the health authorities. And within the European Union, there are differences within each and every member state how this application has to be submitted. Just for example, in Malta, they have a very well-defined application form which needs to be filled in and supported with the relevant information and submitted to the authorities. Whereas in Germany, we don't have any specific application form. All you have to do is submit a formal, inspection request, and they will just accept the application. And there are other countries, like for example in Croatia. So we need to appoint a local representative, and they are the one who are responsible for coordinating with the health authorities for triggering the GMP inspection. So apart from the application form and the relevant power of attorneys, the European agency also expect that you provide them relevant supporting documentation. But in today's presentation, we will just cover the key ones. So the first one is the site master file. If you are if you're requesting for an inspection, which is linked to any application, then you also need to provide the details of the product and what is the procedure. You have to provide the details of the EU importer who is going to import the product into EU from the third world countries where they are located, the address, the contact point, and a confirmation that your site is ready to receive the European GMP inspection. And this is one of the most important documents because it helps the client, it helps the authorities to schedule the GMP inspection faster. And there are other documents, but there are, again, in the interest of time, we have restricted only this to the most critical documents. And the last one is when. So when you submit an application and it's accepted, then the European agencies will usually come for an inspection in the clock stop of the new marketing authorization application or a type 2 variation. Next slide, please. So this is a very good initiative which the European authorities have taken. So the question here is it mandatory to have the European GMP certification? The answer is yes and no. So it is possible to get a European GMP inspection waiver provided your manufacturing site is located in one of the countries which are listed on the slides, which is Australia, Canada, Israel, Japan, New Zealand, Switzerland, and United States. So the European Union have a bilateral agreement with these countries, which is defined as the mutual recognition agreements. So if your manufacturing site is located in any of these countries and the respective health authorities have issued you either a manufacturing authorization or a GMP certificate, then it is equally accepted by the European Union, provided the product that you intend to apply in EU is within the scope of this mutual recognition agreement. Next slide, please. So once you file the application and it's accepted by the authorities, the agency will get in touch with you requesting for all the additional information they would like to have in order to plan the inspection. And the duration of audit will basically depend upon multiple factors. The key ones is how many products are involved as part of the application, what is the size of the manufacturing facility, and how many inspectors will be involved as part of the audit. So it's usually 2 auditors who will come for the on-site inspection, and the duration of audit is usually range between 3 to 5 days. And at the end of the audit, the authorities will issue an audit report along with a list of deficiencies, which may be categorized as critical, major, minor. And you will have, or the manufacturing site will basically have approximately 30 days to prepare an initial CAPA responses. And once you submit the CAPA responses, the agency will review them. And if they find that everything is compliant, then they will issue a GMP certificate. The timelines between the for issuance of the GMP certificate after you submit the CAPA response, it varies from one agency to other, but it's usually between 30 days to 90 days. And the validity of that GMP certificate is 3 years from the date of inspection. So that is more important. It's not from the date of issuance of the GMP certificate, but it is 3 years from the date when the inspection was performed. Next slide, please. So until now, we have seen what are the requirements for European GMP certification, how it is triggered. And now we are moving into the second part of the presentation to discuss how COVID-19 has impacted the European GMP certification process. As we all know that COVID-19 has impacted anything and everything, and so is the pharmaceutical industry. It has led to a disruption in the pharmaceutical supply chain, and in some countries, even a shortage of medicines. And the regulators, along with the pharmaceutical industry, are also facing a lot of pressure for introducing new medicines to treat the COVID-19 infections. And all this has basically led to an increase in the number of GMP inspection being received by the European authorities. Next slide, please. Talking about the numbers, let's analyze the situation in the pre-COVID-19 and the post-COVID-19 era. So as you can see in the figure number 1, there has been increase in the number of GMP inspection the authorities, European authorities have been performing. So there is an increasing trend, and that trend also translates equally in the number of inspection being performed within Europe as well as outside of Europe. So in 2019, there were close to 4,000 GMP inspections which the European authorities had performed, out of which 2,800 were within the European Union and close to 1,200 were outside of the European Union in third countries. And when we look at the situation post-COVID, so as you can see in figure number 4, in 2020, the European agencies were only able to inspect close to 2,300 manufacturing sites, which is almost 50% of what they did in 2019. And of those, of the total GMP inspection that were performed in 2019, most of them were again in European Union because of the travel restrictions and difficulty in mobility across the continents. And in 2021, it is still, please go to the previous slide. And in 2021, as you can see, the number is even smaller. So if you see the graph number 6, there were hardly close to 50 to 70 inspections that the European agency was able to perform in 2021. Next slide, please. So for this graphs, it helps us to understand what is the amount of backlog of GMP inspections that we are facing or the agencies are facing. Can you go back to the previous slide, please? The previous slide. So if you see, as I told you, the validity of the GMP inspection is only for 3 years. So at the end of 3 years, that needs to be renewed. So if you see the numbers in 2018 and 2019, so if you total up those numbers, we are looking at close to around 7,000 GMP certificates that were issued. and those will be needs to be renewed in 2021 and 22. And it's still not possible for the European authorities to travel and do the audit in order to extend those certificates. So 2021, 22, and 23 are going to be tough years in order to catch up with the existing backlogs. And this does not include the new applications, which that has been submitted to the European authorities for the inspection. So overall, we are looking somewhere around 7,000 to 10,000 GMP applications, which are pending at the European authorities. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the question is, what has the European authorities done to tackle the situation? So they've taken two steps. The first one is they've extended the validity of the existing GMP certificates. Initially, the validity was extended until 2021, but recently this validity has been further extended until the end of 2022. So that is a big relief for all the manufacturers exporting their drugs to the European Union. And the second point, what they have implemented is a new concept, which is called as distance assessment. So they have published, the European Union has published a guideline, which is EMA 335293 of 2020, which explains how they intend to perform the distance assessment, what are the qualification criteria, and what are the procedures involved. And as you can see from the graph, they had already initiated this activity in 2020, and and they had audited close to around 30 sites outside European Economic Area. And this number is increasing in 2021. So it's almost, I would say, double than what was done in 2020. So that is a positive note. Next slide, please. So the guideline, it explains what is distance assessment. So we will not go through the definition. It is for self-read. But what's important for us to understand is what site qualifies for the distance assessment. So not all manufacturing sites are eligible for a distance assessment from the European authorities. There are certain criteria, and the European agencies do a risk assessment, and based on which they select like which sites qualify and which sites doesn't qualify. At the moment, the European authorities are only auditing the sites which has been previously audited by the European authorities or equivalent authorities, like for example, US FDA, TGA, or Swissmedic. The European authorities are still a bit hesitant in scheduling the GMP inspection for new lines of the existing manufacturing sites or new sites which have never been audited by any of the European authorities, and especially the sterile manufacturing site. Because of the nature of the product, the agencies have strictly eliminated the possibility of distance assessment for those manufacturing sites. And last but not the least, that all the requests for the voluntary inspection. Next slide, please. So what's next? So at the moment, there is still no clarity from the European agencies, like when they expect to resume the on-site GMP inspections. So we are coordinating with a lot of European agencies in order to either get a clarification of whether they will be performing the on-site audit or they would resume the audits via distance assessment. But we don't have a very solid answer from the European authorities, and that situation is changing, I would say, bi-weekly. So in our experience, we have requested multiple EU GMP requests, and we had a mixed experiences. There were certain situations where the European agencies have confirmed that they will come for a distance assessment, and the audit has been scheduled already. But there are also equally, I would say 30 to 40% of the request where we are still waiting for the confirmation from the agencies. And there are other issues as well, like for example, the quarantine rules, recognitions of the vaccines, which we still need to overcome in order for the European agencies to decide whether they will come on site or not. Next slide, please. So, and let's understand the European view of whether the distance assessment will replace the on-site audit or not. And this is one of the questions which a lot of our clients are asking us. So before the pandemic, the agencies were not ready for a distance assessment. And with this pandemic, there has been innovation with the way the agency would trigger the inspection going forward. And not only from the industry, but also from the agencies, there has been a lot of investment that has been made in the facilities, equipments, the procedures for hosting the live remote interactions between regulatory authorities and the industry. But still, it has its own limitations. For example, it's very difficult to have a 360-degree view of the facility and also look into certain aspects, like, for example, data integrity, which is not possible through the distance assessment mode. So there is room for improvement, and there is a need to refine the hosting capabilities, which could be done based on the experience which is gained by the global regulatory authorities. But definitely, the distance assessment could be used as a tool, first to pre-qualify the sites named in the pending applications for the on-site inspection. Second, to quickly perform the for-cause inspection in a mission-critical situation, like, for example, the nitrosamine impurity cases. And number third is to reduce the number of on-site days the auditors ends up spending for each audit request. So these are the three areas where the distance assessment could be very useful in terms of shortening the time for the European GMP inspection. Next slide, please. So in general, the European authorities are still a bit skeptical with the distance assessment approach, and they see it only as a complementary tool and does not consider the distance assessment as a replacement of the on-site inspection. From the experience, what they have gained so far, the common consensus across the agencies is to rely only on the outcome of the on-site inspection results in order to grant the European GMP certificates. So even if your site has been audited by the agencies by distance assessment, you will see a clause at the end of the certificate that the agency will schedule an on-site inspection as soon as the situation allows. So that's the end of the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have in this area. And I'd like to thank you very much, the sponsors and the organization, for this event. Thank you very much, Leo.
So thank you, Mr. Chinta Java. And so GMP inspection is very important for the pharmaceutical company in China. They try to seek in the market access to Europe. In this moment, some difficulties there, but I believe, with our help and some expert in Europe and remote tools, this barrier can be recovered as soon as possible. Again, well, thank you very much for your very brief introduction. Thank you. I welcome you again later for the Q&A and the panel question. So next speaker, I will welcome the Dr. Ona Busta. And so this topic also very important, refer to the pharmacovigilance requirement in US and EU. And in China, our CDE and the NMPA also have a very high requirement now for pharmacovigilance, this area, this knowledge. So I welcome Dr. Busta. So maybe you can give a quick introduction by yourself, then have your slides. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Leo. Hello, everyone. I'm Ioana Bușiță, and it is my honor to present in today's webinar. I am based in Romania. I am a medical doctor specialized in allergology and clinical immunology, and I have worked in hospital setting in the beginning of my career. And afterwards, I have shifted to pharmacovigilance domain. And now I am working as a deputy EU QPPV and pharmacovigilance specialist. Next slide, please. Okay, so in today's presentation, we will clarify how to manage the pharmacovigilance responsibilities and activities between EU and US, and how to build a robust and cost-effective EU-US PV system. And hopefully this presentation will clarify these questions. Next slide, please. Next. Here in the presentation, following points will be covered: pharmacovigilance requirements in US and EU, the difference between pharmacovigilance requirements in US and EU, setting up a single system for pharmacovigilance in US and EU, and challenges and approaches. Next slide, please. So, which are the pharmacovigilance requirements in US and EU? Let us first understand what pharmacovigilance is. Pharmacovigilance is about monitoring the safety of medicinal products. The term pharmacovigilance relates to both the science and the actions taken to ensure that medicines are safe, to reduce their risks, and to increase their benefits. Pharmacovigilance is therefore vital. It means that the safety of all medicinal products is monitored throughout their use, and information on risks is generated and appropriate action can be taken. Now let's have an overview of pharmacovigilance. The process of pharmacovigilance involves several distinct steps, such as collection of information on potential side effects, detecting if any new or changing side effects have arisen, deciding if action is needed to optimize the safe and effective use of the medicine, and then communicating this to the users of the medicine. And it is also very important to follow up as to check whether the actions taken have been effective or not. Next slide, please. Now, let us understand what is Marketing Authorization Holders, MAH, obligation with respect to pharmacovigilance in Europe. As per the EU guidelines, it is the ultimate responsibility of a MAH to ensure that the medicinal product placed in the market is safe and effective for use. To ensure a smooth transition from the pre-authorization to the post-authorization phase of the life cycle of a medicinal product, it is the responsibility of the MA applicant in EU to have in place a robust pharmacovigilance system for monitoring patient safety once the medicinal product is on the market. In order to facilitate the performance of pharmacovigilance activities in the EU, the responsibility of the MAH begins from the date of submission of dossier, continues following authorization, and remains active until the product is on the market. EMA has published Good Pharmacovigilance GVP guidelines for pharmacovigilance activities, modules 1 to 16 in July 2012. Next slide, please. Next. Now, let us understand what is Marketing Authorization Holders, MAH, obligation with respect to pharmacovigilance in US. Following pharmacovigilance requirements are to be followed by every MAH in US. Pharmacovigilance system setup for US, literature monitoring, case processing and submission, preparation and submission of periodic adverse drug experience report, and medical information. For pharmacovigilance, the US follow 21 CFR section 314.80, post-marketing reporting of adverse drug experiences. In the next few slides, we will see pharmacovigilance requirements that the MAH in US needs to follow. Next slide, please. Let us begin with pharmacovigilance system setup in US. The MAH in US is required to appoint a US agent who acts as a contact point between US FDA and the MAH, to set up a safety database for processing and submission of individual case safety reports and for generation of line listings and summary tabulations, and to set up the electronic submission gateway, ESG, which is required to perform submissions of PADER and ICSRs to US FDA. Next is conduct of global literature monitoring. In this case, the MAC should perform literature review no less frequently than once a week. The aim is to identify individual case safety reports and safety information from literature. Taking into consideration the reporting requirement, the clock for reporting, that is day 0, starts when the literature search is conducted. Next slide, please. Next comes case processing and submission. Case processing is an important part of pharmacovigilance. As there is continuous generation of patient safety data, this information is spontaneously received via healthcare professional or consumer, literature, and health authority source. Received information is collected and processed in the MAC safety database in a stepwise manner. Information is collected, triage is performed, duplicate check is performed, information is processed in the safety database, and then the case is submitted to US FDA. The output is generated in the format expected by US FDA, that is the MedWatch form. Cases qualified for submission are reported in defined timeframes set by US FDA. This data is also useful for preparation of PADR. Next slide, please. Let's talk about preparation and submission of Periodic Adverse Drug Experience Report, PADR. The marketing authorization holder is responsible for PADR submission once marketing authorization approval is received for a medicinal product in US. The MAC is required to prepare PADR at quarterly intervals for 3 years from the date of approval of the application and then at annual intervals. Next slide, please. One of the important requirements is the setup of medical information by the MAC. Healthcare professionals and consumers are encouraged to report observed or suspected adverse events with use of medicinal product directly to the MAC. The MAC is encouraged to have a system in place for management of complaints received from healthcare professionals and consumers and provide appropriate response for their query. In order to collect ADR information from healthcare professionals and consumers, the MAC can set up a dedicated phone number, email ID, or receive via post or fax. Next slide, please. So the above are some of the basic requirements of US pharmacovigilance, and next few slides we will see differences between pharmacovigilance requirements in US and EU. First, let's take a look at the work that is required in both Europe and the United States. Then we will look at which activities are unique to the EU but not required by the United States. Regarding common pharmacovigilance activities that are required in EU and the United States, we have summarized the following points. They are PV system setup, safety database, literature monitoring, case processing and submission, aggregated report, medical information, PV training, SDA with business partner, and last, if you outsource pharmacovigilance, you need to sign a technical agreement with a PV provider. Next slide, please. Although these activities are needed in Europe and the United States, there are still some differences in the operations performed, such as in the US, foreign MA holders require appointment of a US agent, while in the EU, in addition to the EU QPPV, some EU member states require nomination of a pharmacovigilance contact person at national level. And for adverse drug reactions, ADRs, in US, the ADR form used for reporting is MedWatch, whereas in EU, CHOMS form is used. Moreover, in US, spontaneous ADR reporting database used is FDA Adverse Event Reporting System, whereas in EU, it is EU Data Processing Network and Management System for reporting and evaluation of suspected adverse drug reactions, also known as UDRA Vigilance Database. Let's look at the mode of individual case safety report submission. In US, reportable ICSRs are submitted electronically via ESG, whereas in EU, it is done via UDRA Vigilance Gateway. With regards to risk management, US FDA may determine the necessity of risk evaluation and mitigation strategy and risk minimization action plans, whereas in EU, it is mandatory to submit a risk management plan, an RMP. Finally, with regards to periodic reports, US FDA require PADER, whereas in EU, PSUR or PBRER is submitted. Next slide, please. There are also some jobs that are specific to the EU, but not required in the United States, such as US Pharmacovigilance guideline does not mention about setup of Pharmacovigilance System Master File, that is the PSMF, whereas it is a legal requirement for the MAH in EU to maintain and update a PSMF. US Pharmacovigilance guideline does not specify about requirement of QPPV, whereas it is mandatory to appoint a QPPV in Europe. US Pharmacovigilance guideline does not mention about local literature search, whereas screening of local journals is expected by the MAH in EU. The other is the maintenance of product information by MA holders. In the EU, ICSI VMPD was established by Vigilance. EMA requires MA holders to maintain all product information here. The PV in the US does not have this requirement. In general, in addition to the requirements summarized above, the EU's PV work starts at the time of submission of dossier, while in the US starts after approval, and the EU's requirements are slightly more. Next slide, please. So, from previous slides, we understand that there are some differences in pharmacovigilance requirements in US and EU, and however, some requirements are common for both. So there is a possibility for setting up a single system for pharmacovigilance in US and EU. The first requirement would be a global safety database. Pharmaceutical companies must operate a suitable safety database to allow for timely and accurate reporting in the correct format to US FDA and EMA. Here, the MAH can maintain a single global database which supports worldwide operations. ICSRs from global source can be processed in a single pharmacovigilance database and submitted to EU and US regulatory authorities. Further, the MAH can generate line listings and summary tabulations that can be used for aggregate report writing, PSUR, and PADER. Next slide, please. Also, the MAH shall have pharmacovigilance agreements in the form of safety data exchange agreements, SDAs, between US and EU subsidiaries. SDAs define the roles, responsibilities, and timelines with respect to sharing of safety information between EU and US subsidiaries. Having SDAs in place helps to control and guarantee that no safety data falls through any gaps. It is important that all the data is available, and there needs to be a system of acknowledgement of receipt and reconciliation of data sent and received. SDAs can be requested for inspection under EU drug safety regulations and equivalent FDA legislation within the US. Next slide, please. Also, if the MAH has the same active substance authorized in EU and US, then the screening of medical literature can be harmonized. A common search strategy can be used for an active substance approved in EU and US, and the common frequency of literature search can also be set, for example, weekly. Next slide, please. About cross-reporting of ICSRs, based on health authority-specific requirements, an ICSR originated in domestic country may require reporting in a foreign country. In US, all serious and unexpected cases from domestic and foreign source need to be submitted within 15 calendar days. This is also referred to as 15-day alert reports, and all serious expected and all non-serious cases from domestic source need to be submitted at the time of PADER submission. This is also referred to as non-15-day reports. Whereas in EU, the marketing authorization holder shall submit information on all serious suspected adverse reactions that occur in the European Union and in non-EU countries within 15 days following the day they gain knowledge of the event. Furthermore, the information on all non-serious suspected adverse reactions that occur in the EU will be submitted within 90 days from day 0. Next slide, please. Now, let's see some common challenges and approaches that the MAH may face while performing pharmacovigilance activities for US and EU. For example, the challenge is lack of communication on sharing of safety information between two subsidiaries. The approach would be to define roles and responsibilities with respect to sharing of safety information by developing pharmacovigilance agreements between both subsidiaries. Next. The challenge would be cross-reporting of ICSRs to US and EU regulatory authority. The approach is to maintain a global safety database for processing and submission of ICSRs to EU and US regulatory authorities. Next slide, please. Next slide. The challenge is that pharmacovigilance audits of business partners are not performed. The approach is to have a complete overview of business partners for both the subsidiaries and the quality assurance personnel or pharmacovigilance service provider can prepare and follow pharmacovigilance audit schedule for MARC's business partners. Another challenge would be maintenance of safety data exchange agreement. The approach would be to develop a process for continuously monitoring of the roles and responsibilities defined in SDAs and to ensure that information in SDAs are updated. Next slide, please. And that is all about my presentation today. Thank you all for joining, and I wish you to have a good time ahead. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Busta, and so you got very constructful and instructful and presentation for pharmacovigilance. So far we still have 200 people online, and we have two channels, two broadcasting platform. One is Zoom, another one in channel with Xiaoletong. We still have 120 people there. So, which means, very late at night in China, we are close to 10 o'clock p.m. Still have 200 people there to listen our, presentation. So, which means, tonight and people try to learn more about European guideline and for the future China pharmaceutical internationalization. So again, well, thank you for your exciting and interesting presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So next speaker, and so we warmly welcome and Professor Jean Jackie. Sorry, every time I cannot pronounce your name very completely and perfectly. So later I will ask you, Professor, you can give a very brief introduction by yourself, but in Chinese, I will tell our attendee here in Chinese. 我想告诉在座的观众是今天晚上我们非常荣幸
tell you that we are very honored to invite Professor Zombrowski. He is really like the best one in France, and he is very renowned and very influential public health professional. And he has promoted the COVID information in media. In China, we have such a hot doctor, which is called Zhong Nanshan. So we call Professor Zombrowski the French Zhong Nanshan. Okay, so that's really a very good applauding name.
Come to stage to give your presentation. You're welcome. You're muted. You're muted.
Okay, I just said, 谢谢也刘 and 你好, thank you for attending this session. And actually, I'm a medical doctor by first training, and then I take other degrees in political sciences, health computer sciences, and health policies and health economics. And I'm teaching health policies and health economics at Paris University and also at the European level. So I'm going to talk about registration, pricing, and reimbursement models in Europe. Next slide, please. First of all, for a long time, China has been turned to the United States of America. But after the US, Europe is the world's biggest pharma market. Never forget that Europe is more than 500 million people. Of course, it's less than China, but it's more than Northern America. Europe is significantly more challenging than the US in terms of entering the market, as the Johanna and the other speakers, Chitan and the others, just explained to you. The regulation is quite challenging in here, although it's very attractive. Next slide, please. These are the few slides explaining the medical spendings in 2020, which are the last figures, of course, we can have, by geography, product type, and this is rare, and the dose consumed by country last year. As you can see, the United States is the light blue, Europe, EU5, the 5 biggest country in Europe are the dark blue, and then it's the Japan, the green there. This is China, somewhere in here. And of course, the emerging countries and so on. And the rest of the world, unfortunately, has a limited access to drug and to innovation. However, after the very big America here comes Europe, and mainly the EU 5 most important countries. Next slide, please. When we say it is challenging, it is due to the fact that each of the 27 countries in Europe, plus the states which are following the European rules, count no less than 48 agencies, which make a lot of diversity, although we theoretically follow the same basic rules. However, it's quite challenging, and you need to select someone who will be your partner to make the route and the process within those 48 agencies easy. Otherwise, it's somewhere that which you can lose your patience whenever you are full of patience and willingness to succeed. Next slide, please. It is true that there is a fast-changing economic environment. All over Europe, there is a pressure of the member states to keep within the health insurance budgets. All over Europe, unlike in the United States, health insurance is controlled or literally run by the governments, by the states. Whenever private companies are part of it, they work under the government control. The tariff is controlled, the tariff in a hospital, the tariff in a doctor, the tariff of a drug. All this is controlled by the different governments, and the marketing authorization is always controlled by the governments, and the same all over Europe. Of course, there are dramatic technological advances, but they are also very expensive. I need not to insist on the new biological pathways, the advanced therapy, medicinal products, the personalized medicine based on genetics and genomics, the digital medicine, and so on. Of course, all over Europe, the population is aging. Since I was born in the middle of last century, the life expectancy for men has increased by more than 20 years, which means that many people are aging and get the kind of disease which appear when you get older. There is a growing prevalence of chronic conditions. 10 years ago, cancer would be a lethal, fatal condition. Nowadays, it becomes a chronic condition. There are, of course, initiatives from all the regulators, all the payers, who are always government controlled, to develop synergies. There is a risk aversion of all the payers, which is increasing. And finally, the health organizations are moving towards integrated healthcare, from ambulatory care to hospital, from hospital back to home, and so on, all along the patient's pathway. Next slide, please. The European Medicine Agency is the EU agency which is responsible for the scientific evaluation of centralized marketing authorization and the application which has been described by Chetan and Johanna, among others. And once granted by the European Commission, the centralized marketing authorization is valid in all the European Union member states, that is to say 27 member states, plus Iceland, Norway, and Liechtenstein. But despite the theoretical centralized marketing authorization is common, the pricing and the reimbursement are not centralized. Each member state has its own policy and its own rules. And this is why, again, one needs someone who will assist the company in knocking at the right door at the right time with the right elements. Next slide, please. As I said earlier, most of the European countries have a healthcare system that mainly relies on contribution from the employers and the employees. This is what we call all over Europe social health insurance. Of course, there might be some private companies trying to find supplementary insurance, but most of it is controlled, and most of the expenses, namely in severe and chronic condition, is paid by a public organization. Here you have in light blue the social health insurance, and in yellow what is called the National Health Service, but basically it's a centrally controlled, unique system that pays for all the drugs, all the medical services in hospital or outside of the hospital. Next slide, please. Leo, thank you. In the European Union, the government authorities, now you understand why, are responsible for the pricing of medicine. Usually it's through the Ministry of Health, but sometimes it also includes the Ministry of Social Affairs and the Ministry of Economy. Now, depending on the organization of the healthcare systems, bodies and agencies that form part of the social health insurance or the National Health Service oversee the reimbursement. For example, in France, while healthcare is funded through a statutory health insurance, the pricing decision is made by a committee composed of several ministries representative, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Social Security, the Ministry of Economy, and the proper paying body, which is the health insurance fund. All this is under the supervision of the government. And the scope of medicines that are price regulated or which are included in the reimbursement may vary between the countries. A drug might be reimbursed here and not there, might be quite easily prescribed by any doctor or limited to a certain specialist in another country. Next slide, please. It's important to understand that the sustainability of healthcare systems is key in the drug funding decision. Since the government are responsible for the system, they of course want the system to be sustainable. And this is why when they admit a drug for reimbursement, for being paid by the community, it is because they believe that this drug will improve the quality and or the quantity of life for the patient who will receive the drug as compared to what was previously existing and usually cheaper. Drug market access, drug pricing, drug reimbursement decisions are increasingly coordinated to enable fast patient access to innovation. It is unacceptable to see a new drug being accepted somewhere, and while it is clear that this drug is effective, there have been many publications and talks about the drug, that the French patients or the European patients will not be able to have this drug. And therefore, there is a fast track all through Europe to access the fast patient access to innovation. Now, there is a shift from initial restricted access to progressive wider coverage, which is increasingly based on real-world data. And this is why the agencies will ask the pharmaceutical companies to collect through registries and to the pharmacovigilance centers, as just described by Johanna, to have those registers when every single patient will be carefully followed, and to collect and then to treat and then to make deductions from the real world data and real world evidence to see in real patient confirm or not the phase 3 trial results. Next slide, please. This is just a map to show how complex the system might be. There are many different agencies, laboratories, control centers, far more than in some countries. But this diversity explains that the supply chain is also a complex network. This is what is on this slide. The supply chain for drugs is a complex network. And of course, you have to understand exactly how things are going. For example, in the COVID-19 Pfizer vaccine, it is made by 4 different factories, 2 located in Germany, 2 located in Belgium, belonging to 2 or 3 different companies. And all this creates a very complicated supply chain, not to mention the glass vials, not to mention the cardboard boxes, and so on. So supply chain is a very complex, very uneasy to understand at a glimpse network. Next slide, please. In 2020, COVID-19 pandemics has accelerated and intensified the plan of the European Commission to quickly initiate a structured dialogue with and between all the actors in the pharmaceutical manufacturing and the public authorities. The idea of such a project is to identify vulnerabilities in the global supply chain of critical medicines and shape policy options to strengthen the continuity and the security of supply in the US. There is no doubt that some products have been manufactured only overseas, only outside of Europe, due to their price. It was too expensive as compared to the price allowed for the reimbursement to be produced somewhere in Europe, even in the cheapest countries in Europe, and therefore some drugs were 100% manufactured elsewhere, namely, for example, in China. This also happened for masks. And it is true that the COVID-19 pandemics made the government think that at least we ought to re-implement in Europe part of the manufacturing whenever, or to secure the supply chain. This is something that people are thinking about, how to make sure that there will be no interruption in the drug pipeline and in the drug procurement. Next slide, please. Actually, as I said, China has been for long turned to the United States of America. But the European regulatory framework is not more complex than the American. This is what is shown on the table on the right side of the slide. Note that the electronic submission is basically similar. The electronic common technical document is the interface and has the international specification for pharmaceutical industry to agency transfer of regulatory information. It's 95% similar. GAPS in the MA process are almost identical. Most European countries have one single pricing authority, and reimbursement is national for each EU countries, as I explained earlier. Next slide, please. And I think that was what I wanted to share to you, and we look forward to having further discussions with all of you. Thank you.
So thank you very much for your for the professor. And you know, reimbursement is very important topic in China now. You know, we talk of volume beating procurement, national discussion for the pricing for new drugs in China. So, which means you have to think about the price and how to price your product before go to market. We see a question in the chat box just for this reimbursement question. So maybe later you can give an answer. So we are a little late for the timing, but we still have 30 minutes to go and to to have a slide by Dr. Mandabuzdi. So Professor, I will thank you again very much for your timing and to join today's webinar. We hope in the future we can see you more through more practitioners to change attendees for the topic. Thank you very much. Thank you. So now the last slide again by Dr. Mandabuzdi, and for the how can Chinese company go to Europe from the BD perspective. So Dr. Mandabuzdi, you're welcome.
Thank you, Leo. Yes, what have we learned from the presentation of our colleague is that indeed penetrating the European market can be challenging, but knowledge of this market is key. Working with local experts, it's the key to be successful there. But I will try to cover, yes, the R&D, because the R&D, the innovation is, I would say, the first thing to do, in order to be able to sell. So it's true that China again became the second largest pharmaceutical market after the US in 2016. If we are not considering Europe as a single entity, by 2018, sales reached $137 billion US, doubling in just 6 years. And today there are still more cross-border investment, as Jean-Jacques said, from China to the US than there are between China and Europe, but the trend is changing. It's true that today investment from China into the US biotech and pharmaceutical company are facing more and more strict controls and approval procedure. Therefore, investors are looking for alternative, and interest in Europe biotech and market is growing rapidly. So as sales continue to climb, they are projected to equal half of Americans' sales by 2030, which is huge. Next slide. And despite 25 years hemorrhaging of research and development activity to the US and China, the European industry still invested an estimated 40 billion euros in R&D in 2020. With over 7,000 medicines in development in Europe, a new wave of innovations will play a key role in addressing these challenges faced by patients, healthcare system, and society. But in the global context of aging populations and chronic diseases, and why we know that China, as Europe and the US, is facing these issues, the adoption of innovation places additional pressure on resources worldwide. So by rethinking the healthcare system, financing, and development strategies, both China and Europe can benefit of each other to improve patients' access to new biotech medicines. So strengthening China-Europe biotech strategic partnership will be key to achieve these goals. Next. Yes, with an increasing focus on healthcare innovation, the rapid evolution of Chinese biotech is bringing benefits to companies and patients around the world. Chinese healthcare market was really starting to evolve, moving from generics and traditional medicines to innovation in less than 50 years. In 2021, the Chinese biotech landscape is almost unrecognizable from what it was even just 5 years ago. And this is my personal experience there. We really see this as an exciting market with interesting companies that are rapidly moving into globally competitive innovation. I mentioned a few examples in my previous presentation. This huge growth has been mainly fueled by returning Chinese expats, but not only, but also by governmental incentive to fuel innovation. Next. While healthcare system only began privatizing in the 1990s, China rapidly grew into the world's second largest pharmaceutical market. As such, China Brothers healthcare sector is projected to be worth $2.4 trillion by 2030. And while the sector grows in size and prominence, several Chinese firms are already actively disrupting the global biotech industry through cutting-edge research and extensive international partnerships. We see more and more Chinese companies progressing worldwide in an incredible fast way. So China's biotech industry is expected to grow, to continue its trajectory, fueled by a series of tailwinds, such as changing domestic consumption patterns and demographics, greater access to capital, and national legislation encouraging biotech innovation. A study from Frost & Sullivan forecasts China's biotech market to grow at a 5-year growth rate of 16% by 2025, making it the world's fastest. Next. A lot of multi-billion VC, we talk about the funding, a lot of multi-billions VCs and private equity funds have been created, leading to a combination of both experienced leadership and the necessary capital to fuel private and early stage companies. This has led to rapid increase in the number of Chinese biotech. Moreover, China has also developed a complete financing ecosystem from early stage investment to IPO, allowing biotech companies to raise massive fundings. And we see often now on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, also star market companies raising $700–800 million US, which is incredible, compared to Europe. But they raise massive funding to first support companies launching their product worldwide, but also to refuel the biotech pipeline. A big part of this success has been driven by the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, as I said previously, which changed its rules a few years ago to better suit biotech companies. Now the company can be listed even at pre-profit stage, which has been a dramatic change, for listing companies on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And this has been coupled with a new stock market in Shanghai, the Star Market, established in June 2019. And these changes have helped to complete the ecosystem. So Chinese investors today can achieve a successful exit with biotech, giving them the confidence to reinvest their profit into the next generation of companies and also fueling the innovative ecosystem in China. Next. The Chinese government regards the rapid development of biotechnologies as critical to tackle the looming challenges facing China's healthcare system. This includes caring for a rapidly aging population, the rising burden of public and private healthcare spending, and high morbidity for non-communicable diseases. Some of the key initiatives include, as you know, the Healthy China 2030 plan, not only as an official strategic emerging industry and explicitly named in the Made in China 2025 plan, China's biotech industry is strongly supported by the government through R&D program, infrastructures, and development program, and also urban planning initiatives. And as a critical and strategic priority within the Made in China 2025 plan and the China's 13th five-year plan, Beijing has created a number of initiatives, including the development of several biotech parks in the Greater Bay Area. And government support for biotech over the last 20 years resulted in 22 life science parks in China, but the Greater Bay Area intends to build on this momentum. Next. There is also a big push from the government on regulatory and reimbursement reform. As Leo said previously, this regulatory reform have deeply transformed the China FDA into an agency able to regulate innovative products. Time to market for drug approvals in China was longer compared to the US and Europe, but China cut down the lag time drastically in the recent years from 85 months lag in 2017 to 28 to 31 months lag in 2018, an incredible change. Since then, China continued to minimize drug approval times while providing a fast-track accelerating review process for high-priority drugs, such as those treating cancer and other unmet medical needs, COVID and other emerging infections. Given the regulatory reform that have happened, Chinese clinical trials have also become a potential way to accelerate clinical trials. And it's true that we've seen the dramatic reduction of timelines for a clinical trial approval in China. I saw that the change between the 2000 and today is just amazing. And on top of that, public health coverage has increased dramatically these past years, allowing about 1.4 billion Chinese citizens to get access to government insurance with innovative treatments being reimbursed. And it's funny because I was part of the discussion when China implemented this rule. Next. Intellectual property space is also rapidly evolving. there is a major new patent amendment that just got passed last year, which introduces the patent leakage. And as you know, the patent leakage is really a huge incentive for innovation because it prevents a registration authority for granting a marketing approval for a generics or biosimilar, for example, while there is a patent in place covering the drug. This is a real incentive for foreign companies willing to develop, to make business in China. And it's also a great incentive for Chinese companies willing to innovate. So that is going to have big impact. This is going to have a big impact on biotech, both for Chinese companies and Western companies doing business in China. Next. So Europe, as I said previously, Europe has a complex biotech landscape, thousands of companies, not hundreds, thousands of companies, multiple paths to innovation and financing, and marked differences among countries. It's true that segmentation remain high in Europe, but European strengths as a global powerhouse for scientific research and publication does not yet translate into patents for new medicine. European companies were only responsible for originating 13% of the new drug produced by biotechs and approved by the US FDA in 2017 and 2018, while US biotech were responsible for 78%. So the gap is huge and has to be filled. But positive trend, Europe share of new drugs could grow if its biotech are able to attract more investment. They currently receive only 20% of the funding their US and Chinese counterparts do. But Europe also shows great promise in emerging treatments. 32% of all European projects in phase 3 or registration phase for products are based on biotechnology. So a high potential of innovation in Europe. Next. Clearly, we have to be pragmatic. Europe has some way to go to catch up with the United States in patenting commercially relevant innovations and turning science into drug. A lot of research, a lot of high quality research, but the translation into drug remain an issue in Europe. Investment in Europe biotech is increasing, but in late stage financing, Europe lags behind the United States and China by a large and unfortunately still growing gap. The US and China receive almost 5 times as much private funding as their European counterparts do. The gap is especially marked for biotech raising large amounts in late stage private venture financing round or on public market. For a European company, no European market allows this company to raise 300, 400, 500 million euros. It never happened. A maximum of fundraising and an average, I would say it's about 70 to 80 million euros compared to US NASDAQ for 500 and also the Hong Kong and the Star Market, which raise a similar amount of funding. IPOs are 3 to 5 times larger on NASDAQ and on Hong Kong Stock Exchange than European stock exchanges. European biotech are starting to attract a broader pool of investors, including Chinese VCs and private equity. Now it's totaling about 3 to 5% of the total investment in the European biotech industry. It's a positive trend which needs to be expanded and consolidated. Next. Chinese biotech investors are taking an interest in the European market as diplomatic relationships with the US become strained. And this is unfortunately the case today. For European and Chinese companies, because we have to remain positive and to be constructive, there are today a lot of win-win opportunities for companies, investors, and more importantly, for patients. I talked previously about shortages, affordability of drugs. This can be a good opportunity for Chinese and European to build this new ecosystem. Partnering with Chinese companies can be a good way for innovative European biotech to monetize their pipeline. Partnering with European companies can also be an efficient way for innovative China biotech companies to monetize their pipeline and to expand their market share, especially in the oncology and chronic disease fields. Next. Chinese biotech companies are mainly focusing on cancer. Let's be prosaic. This creates an hyper-competitive market in which some are doomed to fail. China-European cross-border strategic licensing acquisition deals represent a real opportunity for both parties and above all for patients who will be able to access to new medicines at affordable prices. Chinese biotech have reached the stage where they have their own innovative pipeline. Many of them are looking to out-license their products for a China right to Europe or the US. We have two examples. AbbVie, for example, signed a deal in early 2020 for the licensing right of an oncology compound developed by IMAB. And they got an upfront payment of $180 million US dollars and several milestones. Junshi Bioscience and Coherus Biosciences signed a licensing agreement in January 2021, where Coherus will have the North American right of an anti-PD-1, toripalimab, with an upfront payment of $150 million US dollars, and the total deal totaling over $1 billion US dollars. This is definitely a new trend, and I clearly think that it is a big opportunity for European companies. Next. Chinese biotech companies are clearly looking to be more integrated into Europe. With the improvement of the scientific and technological strengths in the recent years, many Chinese biotech companies start to shift their EU positioning strategy. Again, the relationship between China and the US is part of the new shift, operated by Chinese companies. Europe remains and is a high-value market, but a growing number of Chinese biotech companies are also taking Europe as a source of creativity by combining their innovation. So we are not only talking about in or out licensing, we are talking about partnership, strategic partnership. But more prosaically, another motivation is that the Chinese market is crowded for a lot of biotech drugs, resulting in a limited market share for companies and price drop. So expanding sales to further attractive markets such as Europe is essential to guarantee sustainable incomes and optimal life cycle of Chinese new medicines. Next. Yeah, I stop there. We will go to the conclusion. Yeah. To the overall conclusion. Yeah. Leo, you have the floor back, so we can go to the conclusion and the Q&A.
Okay, so thank you again. Thank you, Dr. Amanda Buzzi, and your comments and opinion for how Chinese company can seek the access to European market. Why is it important for Chinese company? Yeah, I have a very we still have my colleague from another platform to me. So far, we have more than 1,000 times people in the to watch our online webinar by Zoom, because Zoom in China is not all the attendees can use that platform, but people can use another platform can watch this webinar. So I thank you, our colleague, to make such an exciting moment. Yeah, I have a very 2 minutes conclusion. And so again, we come back to 6 keywords. That's something both Chinese company and also European company, overseas companies, they try to identify the opportunities here between China and overseas markets. But these 6 keywords do dominate the current market and in both China and overseas companies. But what's the solutions? I still think the solution for 2I in innovation and internationalization, that's a global business development. So that's a very key 2way. So how can we license, introduce the innovation from the advanced countries to China? And how can we speed up our internationalization by working with expertise partner in overseas countries like PLT? So yeah, let's see how these keywords can develop and in next phase. Maybe in next year's webinar, we have a new words, but we see innovation and internationalization will dominate for a long time. Yeah, so for the future, I think we will partner with PLT and to introduce and help Chinese company to get a market access to European market. Here I leave my context here. if you need it, and we can talk to you later by connect with the POG expert in France. So we get the last one for our QA, and now it's in China is 10:30, and so we still leave 10 minutes to have this QA. And so again, I will thank you, our organization, senior expert, and the CPH China organizer, and also China Chamber for Import-Export organization and the POG, and for this exciting webinar. And we have some questions here. I will stop my share co-share screen and then come back to QA. Okay. So we see we have a question here. One question from the colleague from Junshi, and the question is about the pricing and reimbursement for this question. So I will ask, appreciate the professor Zhang Yak, if you can give a response for this question raised by our attendees from Junshi Bio. So professor,
yeah, would you be kind enough to repeat precisely what the question is? Because I saw that the question during the COVID, but the end of the question I can't read, and the other messages here are with ongoing development and fact and might be submitted or not longed for. You know, there is a tendency for unsatisfactory drugs to be marketed early, as soon as they demonstrate some efficacy, safety which is according to their efficacy, and that the condition for manufacturing and surveillance is acceptable. Then the European marketing authorization given by the EMA and the European Commission cannot be avoided. Then it's up to see if the drug will be recommended, be in the guideline. And of course, there is a constant research, constant seek for more efficacy, more safety, and if possible, reasonable pricing system, since, as we said, all the drugs, all the daily drugs are reimbursed. Some drugs are not reimbursed 100% because they are used for conditions that, for example, are not severe and chronic, but then they will be reimbursed, even if it's only 35 or 65%, the rest is paid by a supplementary insurance, which is also included in the people's salary, whether you work for the government or a public institution, or for a private company, or for yourself. In most of the cases, your job contract includes the fact that these people, including yourself, pay for a supplementary insurance, which we cover for the drugs if the Social Security doesn't pay 100%. And therefore, the impact of any drug, the out-of-pocket expenses, the cost of a given drug for the health insurance systems can always be improved by a drug which shows more efficacy, more durability, more safety, because side effects have a cost, and of course, which comes in a global position and will be recommended by the guidelines, which are updated regularly by the governmental institution with the help of learned societies. So there is no doubt that there are not tender rules for public daily drugs. There might be tenders only for hospitals all over Europe, but for ordinary drugs, they are sold by the manufacturer to a wholesaler, and then bought from the wholesaler to a pharmacy or a pharmacy buying group, because most of the pharmacy in Europe now belong to a buying group, but the price will be fixed. The margins are set by the governments, and the selling price as well as the reimbursement rate is all fixed by the national governments. So it's very different from the US system. It's much more controlled. You can anticipate much more clearly what's going to happen. provided that you were set at the right price, which is, as I said, negotiated centrally and admitted for reimbursement with one single usual payer.
So thank you, Professor Yang Yak. So yeah, this for pricing for reimbursement is very complex and the question country by country, and this definitely is a very big issues for all the governments or PR for RA big issues. So we hope in the future we can have another webinar in terms of the health economy and for the how pharma reimbursement can coordinate by different countries. So thank you again. Thanks, Professor, for your answer. We have another question by Mr. Li Yan. So he asked a question about the clinical data. So how the agency for EMA or other European countries accept the clinical data conducted in China or America, especially from the perspective of ethnic or racial, whether need some percentage of European in the pivotal clinical study. So
it is clear that it against the law in most of the European countries to mention the ethnical origin of people and the color of their skin, as it would be against the law to discuss about, I don't know, their political or religious faith or belongings. This is privacy. So all the statistics in Europe do not mention whether you are as in the US, a Caucasian, an African American, or an Hispanic patient. Patients are patients, and there is no ethnical or racial discrimination that would be against the law. However, the clinical studies made elsewhere in the world, would it be in Asia, in Africa, in America, can always be brought to the European authorities, and they will be able to interpret the results. While it is clear that some part of the clinical studies, it would be beneficial if it is made in Europe, because then the drug will have ambassadors among the key opinion leaders in Europe. And of course, it will be important for the drug, wherever it is manufactured, wherever was the discovery of the drug, being supported by some European key opinion leaders, not only people in the United States or in Japan or in China or wherever, or in Russia. It's important to also include some European clinical research in the file which is submitted to the European authorities and to each of the European countries.
Thank you, Professor, for your feedback for these questions. We still have a question about supply chain and from Mr. Win. And his question is that during COVID, Europe is concerned of uncertainty of drug or API supply from China and India. Big pharma, if we talk about European governments, need to set up preferred tender rules for drugs produced locally. So what's your point of view, and how did we impact out license or commercialization opportunity of Chinese products? So Professor, I think still need your some feedback. I also, as maybe Dr. Manda, maybe need your feedback for these questions.
No, it is clear that there, as I said, there is no tender for drugs produced, whether it's locally or elsewhere. There is no tender for community use for outside of the hospital. And there can be tenders from a hospital buying group, not from a national point of view, but only from a buying group in which several hospitals will group their providing regulations in order to get a better price by buying larger quantities. However, the fact that it is manufactured anywhere in Europe or elsewhere is not important. the tenders are anonymous, and provided that the drug gets an appropriate marketing authorization, provided that in the tender there might be some questions about the reliability, about the supply chain. Of course, is one manufacturing the drug, let's say in Zanzibar or anywhere else, does not give enough certainty about the fact that they will indeed be able to deliver on time the quantities which are mentioned in the purchase order, that will be an issue. So the tenders will try and secure the procurement of the drug along the time, but it doesn't matter whether the manufacturing is made here or there, even in Europe and outside of Europe. This is why the COVID crisis was the opportunity to say that in a very critical environment, when transport was difficult, when logistics became an issue, people try and prefer to have manufacturing facilities somewhere in Europe, when you can always have a lorry truck or a train bringing a drug from the east of Europe to the south of Europe or to the north of Europe, rather than impossibility to load a plane or a ship between a very far country to the European harbor or railway stations. But again, some Chinese companies, for example, have manufacturing facilities somewhere in Europe or have licensing agreements with some European facilities. And this happens to be the case for many drugs which are in fact manufactured by a subcontractor who can be a Chinese company, while the company itself is supposed to be American or European, German, Swiss, French, etc. And this European company will rely on the manufacturing facility that can be very far. And when there is no logistic problem, as in the COVID crisis, the procurement is not a problem. However, when there is a crisis, a difficulty in the procurement, then it becomes an issue. And this is why many governments will approve those companies who will have licensing agreements, or that will control a manufacturing facility somewhere in Europe, in order to make the procurement and the delivery of drugs easy and not subject to any difficulty in the supply chain when there is such an episode as the COVID has shown in the two previous years. So there is no preferred tender rules for drug produced locally, except that in the tender, you can always ask, how can you guarantee that the quantities that will be ordered will be really delivered on time, and there will not be a shortage in the deliveries of a drug which is needed by the pharmacist and the doctors for the patients.
So thank you, Professor, for feedback for this question about supply chain, about tenders, and these very key questions. So Dr. Mant Bouzidi, do you have some additional comments?
Yes, there were some incentives, in order to fast track access to drug in shortages during the COVID-19. We talked about the anesthetics such as the propofol, but again, it was really specific to this crisis. So in a normal way, you have to follow the normal process. And we talked about manufacturing, and the on-site GMP inspection. I think that for Chinese company willing to penetrate the European market, as Jean-Jacques said, partnering with a local partner, CDA, which could be a CDMO or generic manufacturers, for example, or biosimilar manufacturers, is certainly the easiest way in order to guarantee, access to the European market.
Thank you, Dr. Mant Bouzidi, for your comments. So we have go to the last question, and then we will conclude today's webinar. So last question, I think very important question, also very interesting question. But yeah, there's a lot of people have a lot of concern for this one. The question about the vaccine and and drugs approved for COVID. The question like this one. See, so up to the day, how many vaccine and specific anti-COVID-19 drugs have been approved by EMA and FDA respectively? Besides, one Pfizer vaccine and one Merck drug are super rising successful in November. In the year since, does it mean other ongoing development of vaccine and drugs may be terminated or not be lawful? So that's a question maybe.
It's a very good, it is a very good question. No, it's not terminated at all, because we thought maybe too fast that the vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, Pfizer BioNTech, or that the Moderna vaccine would solve the case. Well, it is not true. And it is not true that the immunity conferred by those two leading vaccines in Europe will be sufficient and will be conferring a long-lasting immunity. It is clear that the immunity doesn't last as long as expected. It is true and easy to observe that there need to be a third injection, not only for people at risk, elderly patients or people with comorbidities and so on, but also ordinary people, even children. So the list of vaccines, the market is still open, and the ability of a vaccine to confer immunity, whatever the variant might be, not only the variant Delta, but maybe some other that might come in the future, is still there. So the gates are widely open. If tomorrow a company, be it Chinese or from the moon, would offer a vaccine, messenger RNA vaccine, for example, the immunity of which will last more than 1 year, and that will be able to last whatever the variant is, this product, wherever it comes from, will be approved and will have a success among the people, but because not only the community has to pay for the vaccine itself, the drug, but it has to pay for the injection, for the logistics, for the pharmacovigilance, and so on. So the cost of a vaccine is not only the cost of the product, but the cost of the whole process. And if you can offer to the community a vaccine, again, wherever it is invented and manufactured, which lasts long, which covers all the variants of the virus, then this will be the new golden standard for vaccination. In a very short period of time, the Pfizer, BioNTech, and the Moderna vaccines took the lead. There were some questions about not only the AstraZeneca, but also even some other vaccines, not only with the Russian vaccines, et cetera, but if a new one is coming that will have a performance result that take the lead, they will take the lead in the market as well. And you can be sure that there will be no limitation from the authorities because the cost of the disease, the cost of the epidemics is far more than the cost of the vaccines and the vaccination process. You know, the COVID-19 pandemics has been a very severe harm to all the social life, all the economics, all the, not only the tourism, but a lot of the social and economic life of the countries. And this costs far more than vaccination, whatever the vaccine might be. So the ongoing development of vaccine and drugs has to be continued, resumed. And if someone finds the good treatment, not only as the Merck drug, a treatment for the first days of the pandemics, but for a long-lasting and severe disease, that will be a tremendous success. And same for the vaccination. If the COVID can be prevented in the majority of the people, that will be an enormous success as well. No, it's not terminated, and it has to be prolonged until it is found.
Yes, maybe to add on that, I would say that we have developed the first generation of vaccine and drug at record speed, and this was fantastic. We now have to work on the second generation because, as you know, it's an RNA virus highly mutating, so we have now to target more conserved part of the virus, clearly. And for the drugs, as Jean-Jacques said, you have two phases: the infectious phase, and the antiviral will be certainly efficient, but then you have the inflammatory phase, so you have to develop a second generation of medicines in order to be able to tackle the virus and all the strains of the virus.
And I will even ask the long-lasting COVID, which is people that have had experience of COVID with severe or even non-severe symptoms, but who are suffering from some remaining insufficiencies long after the virus has disappeared, even long after the inflammatory acute phase has ended. And we need to find some drug for those long-lasting COVID. So research ought to be prolonged, and solutions can still be found and brought to the market all over the world.
Well, thank you very much for these insightful comments for vaccination and vaccine development during COVID period. This is a difficult time for human, for all of us, and not only China, all the global. So we hope we can work together, can defeat this virus. We can come back to normal life. So I think that it's a bit late in China. So already 10 minutes to 11 p.m. So, and I want welcome all the speakers and all the work leaders from CPHI, from China Chamber of Import Export Organization. If you can open your video, we can have like a picture together. So then we will conclude our today's webinar. So I have data from our from our colleagues. So totally more than 1,200 people and watch, the times some people go in and go out, but they watch this webinar through the Zoom and through our Xiaoletong is another channel platform for live video. So, still in Zoom platform, still have more than around 6 people here and to have today's webinar. But I think it's not the last one. It's only maybe beginning between our very expertise professors, doctors from Europe and from PLG and to talk with the Chinese pharmaceutical companies. So I want to thank you very much for our, today's speakers from PLG, and also thanks our organizer for CPHI China, and also the colleague from Anjing. So also very important people, our interpreters. I know you're not that sure they can't open your video, but they do a very, very good job, and they are very professional to make sure our attendee can have a good catch up for all the knowledge here. So I'll give a quick announcement, and for CPHI, we will begin again in next month, December 16 to 18. So we have the offline panel workshop during CPHI Shanghai, the afternoon of December 16. Anjing Bell, together with CPHI China, we have a BD forum for this very interesting and important topic with you. So welcome all the attendees. If you come to CPHI Shanghai, you're welcome to join our workshop again. So yeah,
Leo,
so Amanda, I hope you give a conclusion from your side.
Yeah, first of all, we have to thank you, Leo, your team, the translators, the organizers, obviously the speakers, but above all, I would thank a lot the attendees, because it's late in China, and you said that there were hundreds of them. So we are really impressed, and we look forward to have another meeting, to to having another meeting with you, another seminar, and also we are looking forward to follow up with the attendees if they have some needs. We are all there, and we will be very happy to help them, to assist them if they want to develop their business in Europe.
So thank you. So I'm not sure whether the organizer from CPI China, if you want to give some also some wording.
Yes, CPHI China. Yes, obviously, we are on video today, and hopefully next year we'll be there physically. So of course, thank you for them. It was a great webinar. Really, we appreciated it. Hopefully, the attendees also did like it. And again, anytime I will be able to come in China, I will be happy to meet you all there.
Thank you, Amanda. So yeah, as a conclusion, Mark, for all the for today's webinar, if you have follow-up questions, and you can give an email to me or my team here, and also if some people also from CPH PLG, yeah, you can give questions. Maybe we can have some more one-to-one webinar to answer your questions, your concerns. We hope we can see you next time for this interesting webinar and also insightful webinar. So again, thank you again for the people here, and
thank
for
you.
all the team here. Good night for all of us, and
see you
again.
Yes, bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Good
Bye.
night to the Chinese audience, and good afternoon to the rest of the audience.
Thank you very much. Thank you.